Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about 1899 from Netflix. This is the news show. This is episode 1. It's called The Ship, and since it is a news show, I'll start spoiler free for this first one and give you a warning before I go into spoilers. I'll give you my general impressions and just what the premise is, although I won't say too much because I think the trailers neatly kind of, the basic thing is that we're on a ship. It's 1899. And there was another ship called the Prometheus that went missing a few months ago, and there's a mysterious signal maybe alerting to its whereabouts whilst this ship that we're following is on its way to America. And we have a very multilingual set of characters and cast. Obviously the creators of this show did Dark on Netflix before, the very complex time travel show that was a lot of fun to talk about when it was airing a few years ago. So there was a hope that this would sort of capture some of that magic again. Not that anyone wanted the same show again, but more that just that fun of unraveling the mystery, which I think in Dark's case was very satisfying. I don't think the mystery went to a place that felt unfulfilling compared to what they set up. So I guess the hope is that you would have some of that. And obviously we have a show set at sea and possibly some of the aquatic, horror from the deep that you might hope for. There's possibilities of other types of science fiction or supernatural elements in here, which I'll talk about when we get into the spoilers a bit more as to what might be happening and what's going on. We have a very big cast, but it's not as big as Dark was. It's a reasonably big cast, but I think unlike Dark, this show has a central main character, at least in this first episode. We follow Mara, and I don't know a lot of the characters' names yet because a lot of them didn't bring them up, but Mara's our main character, and she's a young English woman, and there's some allusions to her past, her family, and this kind of goes for all of the characters, but like why they're on this ship and why they're going to America, and in some cases, like, are they who they seem to be? There's definitely some of that going on with the characters. So this first episode really is here to set up a few different things. Obviously, it's the story itself with the mystery that goes along with it. Set up all of these characters that we're being introduced to, and along with them, set up some of the key themes that we're going to be playing with throughout the show. I think this first episode clearly shows a few different divides. One is the class divide, which is we have the first class passengers up top who have cabins, who have got a big dining hall and things like that. And then you have the poor passengers in the lower decks who are not allowed to be up on deck and are not allowed to intermingle with the first class passengers. And we see how some of the first class passengers treat some of those other passengers, some with a bit more sympathy, some less so, and then some who are have very ambiguous intentions or interactions. I'll talk about what I specifically mean by that when we get into spoilers, but it sets up class divides is a big part of the show, and on top of that, also other divides such as male and female. There's the main character is a woman, and there's a lot of talk in this first episode about how she has medical training, but she kind of knows where she comes from. She's not allowed to practice medicine. She's only allowed to study it. And there's definitely a few other little things throughout that kind of like feed into that theme as well. So power dynamics, which I guess works into the class system as well, but power dynamics and who's in charge and who's making decisions and who has no say in what they're doing is definitely a running theme so far in this first episode. And we see that throughout multiple sets of characters in like pairs that are kind of made up who interact with each other throughout. So again, I'll talk about that a little bit as well when I talk about who all the characters are and what we kind of learn about them in this first episode. And then aside from that, you have, of course, the kind of the larger mystery seeds that are planted. So obviously most of which come from possibly the other ship that they're going to go find and explore, which is a very, and that part of it's actually the most normal part of the concept is, how many shows or movies have you watched where the premise is the ship, whether it be a ship, sailing on the ocean or a ship in space that goes and checks out another ship that's went derelict, or a mysterious ship they found and something mysterious has happened there before, or whatever it may be. Like, there's so many premises that start with that. Even Alien starts like that. It's a distress call from something and they have to go and see what it is. So that part's pretty simple, but obviously there's more things at play here. There's hints of a larger mystery, and it's going to be a bit more in depth than usually just, oh, there was a monster and it killed everyone. I don't think it's going to be that. If it does turn out to be that, I'm sure it'll be invigorating finding it out. But right now, all we have is some of the broader strokes of the mystery, and I'll talk about what those are specifically when I give you the spoiler warning. But I liked the first episode. I liked it quite a bit. I liked the production value. I liked the mood. It's got a very similar mood to Dark. In fact, that sometimes the music almost sounded like the music in Dark. Maybe that's a critique, or maybe it's just a consistent preference and style that the creators are into. But there was a couple of times where I almost heard that little cue that used to always play in Dark. I thought it was going to go into it at one point. Wouldn't that be an insane twist, actually, that this is set in the same universe as Dark? It'd be kind of wild, because there's at least one actor from that show that's also in this, playing the captain of the ship. He was the stranger on Dark. He did have a name as well eventually, but otherwise say what it was, because like a lot of things in that show, that was definitely a spoiler. But yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. It doesn't have that, and Dark didn't have this either, but it doesn't have that sort of bland Netflix feel to it. You know, obviously some shows they make escape that. Stranger Things is one of them. Mindhunter is another one. You know, they've got examples of shows that escape it, but there's a lot of shows that come from Netflix that have the same kind of middling feel to them in their presentation. And then pacing is the other big thing that really pisses me off in a lot of Netflix shows that aren't very good, is that they tend to just kind of meander because they expect you to keep watching it. This, I felt, had a good cliffhanger. It had a good bit of pacing. It was a full hour long, and honestly, it kind of flew in. I checked the runtime at one point, thinking I was like 15 minutes in, and I was actually like 30 minutes in. That's a good sign. It means if time's passing quicker than what it feels, it's a good sign that it's engrossing, and that the kind of the spooky atmosphere, the sort of the and Dark had this as well, this kind of like heavy atmosphere that it feels like there's an impending quality to, you know, maybe not doom, but there's an impending something coming, and I think you feel that in this, just like you did with Dark. So yeah, I really like the first episode. I am going to talk about all the episodes of this. I've been looking forward to it. And this first episode was definitely intriguing, and obviously this has potentially got some science fiction or supernatural elements that I'm going to talk about in a second, but at the same time, there's a lot of character mystery as well to dive into. So yeah, so spoilers, right? So spoilers for episode 1, just episode 1. I've not watched past that, right? These are going to be my thoughts as we go through the show. So episode 1 spoilers. I guess the first thing to start with is just the overall thing, which is they get a message from the Prometheus, which the location makes little sense. The captain points out that it should have drifted the other direction, if it just, you know, went with the current, but it didn't. And, you know, there's a lot of spookiness and speculation. Some of the passengers and crew are kind of creeped out. Some refuse to go. The captain ends up with a sort of weird team of characters to go with him, because we have Mara, who's got medical training, who's kind of interjected herself with the captain a bit, insisting she go along. And then you've got the sort of lower decks worker, you know, one of the, you know, guys who shovels coal, and the stowaway. There's a black character who's a stowaway on the ship. They're taken along on this trip by the captain when 2 of his crew members chicken out. But the bigger mystery here, though, is obviously where are all the passengers? Yes, there's a good chance they're already dead, but it's not impossible that some of them, or a lot of them, could have survived if they rationed their food. It's not been that long. And the message that's sending the coordinates out stops right after they get there. And it's like, okay, well, did someone just turn it off? And it looks like the telegram or the telegraph has been destroyed, I should say. And we get this, you know, person who's swam from the Prometheus onto the main ship. Which, I mean, did I start talking about what he does? Because he pulls out a beetle, or something like some sort of weird beetle, and puts it under one of the doors, which seemingly unlocks the door for him from the other side? Which begs the question, can this beetle turn into like something bigger, like a person, or something just big enough to open a door, or potentially smaller to pick a lock? But then why would it go in the other side to do it? Because it went under the door to the other side. Surely if it could just pick the lock, you just put it down at the lock on this side. And we see a beetle on the Prometheus as well. But it's not the first time in the episode you see a beetle. You see a beetle... at one point, Maura has like a couple of quick flashes, like she's sort of having this memory, and she sees a beetle. She also sees like a syringe or a couple of syringes, and we'll get into what I think maybe is going on there in a second. But let's just acknowledge what this mysterious character does. There's two mysterious characters on the Prometheus. One is this man who swam across and came aboard the main ship. The other one is the child that they find in the cupboard, who doesn't say a word, who just gets out and presents them with this like pyramid. And the best way I can describe this is, if you've ever seen Hellraiser, it feels a lot like the Lament configuration. It looks like a very complex and heavy pyramid that he's holding. This, it's only about, I don't know, maybe 6 inches tall or something like that. But it looks heavy. It looks like maybe a puzzle quality to it. If nothing else, it seems to be a major MacGuffin in whatever's happening here, which then opens the ideas to: are we talking about cosmic horror? Are we doing Lovecraftian style stuff, where this device is what's led to the demise of everyone on this ship? So now our main ship's at jeopardy. At one point earlier on, when the captain is talking to Mara, they're just sort of looking at the ocean, or they're having a conversation about. I think it's right before they see the Prometheus. He talks about the ocean and says, so many 1,000 meters deep here, and man, even in 1899, man has scaled most of the mountains, has charted out most of the land, but the one part of the earth that's still a genuine mystery is the depths of the ocean. So some horror from the deep, you might say, is a potential here. And if this is like sort of aquatic, like something from beneath has come up, and obviously the quick flash of the vortex in the water at the start of the episode, you get like you get some scenic shots of the water and some mountains and stuff and whatever, and it was in the trailer as well as the vortex of the water. So if there's something from beneath, that's kind of cool, because I like these concepts of these types of things a lot, but I find the way they tell the stories often don't appeal to me. But so far this is hitting for me. I'm into the mystery. I'm into like what the captain's talking about. And maybe him speculating that is a bit of a red herring as opposed to whatever's actually going on. But it was impossible not to like perk up and pay attention. Him having those thoughts in that conversation is not an accident. So super interesting stuff there. So yeah, the kid presents this the pyramid to Mara at the end of the episode. And that's the other thing. It's not even just that they find everyone dead. They don't find any bodies. Like, so far they've found nothing on the ship. So very fascinating stuff there. And I think if we're sticking on mystery stuff, if to come back to Mara herself, her introduction to this episode, which certainly presents a lot of interesting ideas, is she seems to be in like some sort of mental hospital. And she's screaming for her father, and her father's, sort of presented as this mysterious character at the end of the hallway. He steps out of the shadow at the end to see his face, but he's presented as this ominous figure down the hallway, and she's screaming about the ship, and that he's erased her memory of the ship. That she knows something went on, but her father seems to have taken it from her. And then she wakes up on the boat, right? And she's got like bruises and marks around her wrists. And I wasn't sure. I genuinely wasn't sure. Now, if this was any other show, you would assume that these, restraints looking like things around her wrist are something we're going to find out about them. But what I'm trying to say here is I'm not convinced that these restraints around her wrist are from before she got on the boat. The way this was presented to me here at the start of the episode, the way she was kind of seeing this in her dream and then woke up, makes me think there's something more here than this part in the asylum or whatever it is. It's not just a bookend where we'll flash back to the boat. It feels like on some level, Mara had this dream Whether or not that was because there's some sort of timey-wimey thing, and I'm not just saying there's time travel stuff because this is from the creators of Dark, it's just the feeling it gave me. More likely, perhaps, is that she is getting a glimpse of the future. Maybe she's clairvoyant, maybe she has visions, maybe it's related to the, you know, whatever mysterious thing is happening with the Prometheus. Maybe part of it is this weird, like, vortex that, like, sort of messes with how you perceive time or something like that. Maybe what she's about to go through is why she's kind of like seeing. So I guess the way I'm thinking of this is that if you go back to the vortex, right? If you think of a spiral, if she's at the edge of the spiral and she's starting to like have these flashes to the end of the spiral, maybe as we go further into the show, they're going to get more intense and more kind of like frequent and stuff as we're getting to the center, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just, I got the feeling that some of this was not just like, oh, we're seeing some of the future and then we're cutting back to the main timeline of the show. It felt like on some level the character was perceiving at least fragments of this through her dream, and then later when she has these flashes and she sees syringes and she sees this beetle, it felt like, again, those were sort of things to come, and these syringes are probably how she ends up losing her memory by her father's choice. And the beetle, of course, we've already seen this weird colourful beetle looking thing a couple times towards the end of the episode, so it's like, okay, that's something that was going to pop up there. I think that's very intentional. The other part of her character, which is very interesting, is she has a letter, which I think was from her brother. I may be mixing up two letters here. I wasn't sure if the one that had the so there's one that's got a really fancy seal and it says on the envelope that which was lost will be found, or something to that effect. Because obviously one of the teases later on is that the captain has the exact same type of envelope. He has a letter from presumably the exact same person. I don't know if that was the one that had the letter from her brother in it, and therefore her brother has also contacted the captain, or if the letter from the brother she's reading at the start is separate from that. I wasn't sure. I'd have to go back and check. But by all means, if anyone wants to sort of just clarify that in the comments based on what's on this episode, by all means. But certainly this idea, because as soon as I saw the captain had one of these envelopes, it made me wonder how many of the characters have one of these envelopes, and how many of them have been drawn on this journey because they've been coerced. It actually really, the opening of this episode really made me think of video games, actually. And I don't mean this as an insult or a bad way, but it reminded me a lot at the start of a lot of horror games, especially like Silent Hill 2, which, you know, the character James has a letter from his wife saying she's in Silent Hill, and that's why he travels to Silent Hill, but it's all a very mysterious thing. The horror game that came out last year, Tormented Souls, had a similar thing where you get a letter and that leads you to this like mental asylum, and like it really gave me that kind of vibe, which I'm not complaining about. I actually quite liked it. But that's really what it made me think of. So that's very intriguing, and it makes me wonder, okay, so the brother is, because it sounds like the brother might have been on the Prometheus, and hell, maybe the guy at the end of the episode is her brother. He goes in a specific door at the end, but I couldn't remember. Like, I think he goes into like 1103, and I don't know if that was Maura's room number from earlier in the episode. It wasn't something I was necessarily clocking at the time, but it could be, certainly. But it wouldn't surprise me if that turns out to be who this is, but certainly there was an implication between like the way she read that letter earlier on and then the way the captain asked, did you know someone who was aboard the Prometheus? It definitely gave me the vibe that the brother went looking for something to do with their father. It sounds like he was wanting to prove what their father was up to. You know, he's up to something awful, and maybe the father himself is responsible for what's happened to the Prometheus in some way. Maybe these like cosmic horrors or entities from the deep, whatever they are, maybe the father was like trying to raise them or look into them for his own gain, for his own, I don't know, curiosity, or maybe he's obsessed with them, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm just kind of like spitballing here, but it kind of feels like the brother went out to look to see what his father had been doing, and along the way this thing happened, and that's why she's on this boat. She's going to try and sort of follow in his footsteps, and now we've found the Prometheus. all this weird shit's going on. You assume it's related. You know, all very intriguing. Like, regardless of what we're doing here, like, I'm into it so far, and I'm looking forward to getting the more hints and tidbits, and looking for the little just those little nuggets and those little connections. But I really enjoyed the kind of the all the teases we got in this episode, and some of them obviously feel kind of separate. The stuff on the boat feels separate to all the Mara stuff, other than the fact that she maybe knew someone, possibly her brother, on the boat. But I do think they're all connected. Like, I do think ultimately, like, what he was looking into is probably going to be what's happened to the Prometheus. Not that he was looking into that, but like whatever he was going to look into ended up being the cause of what's happened to the Prometheus, and what maybe now all these characters are at jeopardy of. So yeah, no, I think they do a good job setting up the characters. I think that's a good way to spin into that. I think Mara, you know, very early on, we get a sense of her. We get a sense of her having this past where she's got these, you know, maybe these wristbands are from the past, from her context. Maybe she does know exactly what they are. And, you know, maybe was it her father who did this to her? Or was her father already locking her up and she's escaped onto this boat? She's escaped from that sort of torment, and sadly it looks like she's going to be back with her father after this is all over, because that's kind of depressing. Hopefully there's some hints of a shinier day beyond that. And then, but it does some smart things early on. You know, she goes down and helps the passengers in the lower decks. When a pregnant woman's having some intense pain, she's able to go down and alleviate the pain by just moving the baby and putting her at comfort. And no one wants her to help at first. No one can speak the same language. It sounds like a lot of these passengers down there are German, and she doesn't speak the language. So there's that. I mean, that's another divide, actually. There's a lot of divides because of language in the series, which again is probably very intentional. I assume, though, that the reason why we're following an English character, and that why the main character's speaking a lot of English, is probably something that was maybe a little guided by Netflix themselves, just in that Dark was a huge hit despite the fact that it was a German show, like worldwide, I mean. So they probably like, hey, try and get some English into your next show so we can even sell it to more like people around the world. And you know, that's probably going to work out well for them, I imagine. But yeah, so they set up her character quite well with that stuff, and give you a reason to like, okay, she's a nice person. Everyone else was ignoring. You know, one of the big moments of the class divide is this German guy from the lower decks runs into the dining hall and just is yelling. No one can. Well, we don't know how many people in the room can understand him, because we don't know how many people in the room can speak German. But he does yell out the word doctor in English. And we've actually just found out from another character who's talking to Mara that there is a doctor there. So she points out this chubby, aristocrat-looking guy, that he's a doctor, but he's a buffoon, and it's bullshit that Mara can't be a doctor, but this guy can. And when he asks for a doctor and he's begging, he's on his knees begging, this guy just jams his toast. So we're getting this, you know, very clear delineation between the different sets of characters, and how some of these first-class characters are going to look down upon the others. That's going to be a big part of this show. And it happens repeatedly throughout the episode. Obviously, you have Mara going down to help with the situation, but the sailors on the ship, you know, they like kick the guy down backstairs and lock the stairway. I don't know if it's the only stairwell down to the lower decks. I presume not, but it seems to be the main one. And we get that. Other characters, so the guy who came up asking for help, we do see him a little bit later. We see him with a character who... So yeah, I'll just sort of go through these groups, because they're mostly in pairs, actually. So we have who claim to be brothers. I'm not convinced that they necessarily are. But certainly there seems to be some deception going on. So there's a pair of brothers, one of whom is just very sort of pompous and is kind of turning his nose up at everyone, and then the other one's a priest. The reason why I'm doubting that they're being very truthful here is that later on, before the captain asks, or when the captain's asking for the priest to come with them to the Prometheus, because, you know, it's 1899, he thinks a man of faith will be comforting to any survivors they find. There's a line from the pompous brother where he says, "You're a priest, remember," which to me made it sound like he's not really a priest, that they are in disguise. In fact, one of the best moments of best little character moments of the episode is with these two when the ship's turning to go look at the distress call. Like, that's right before this happens, and we see a lot of different reactions to this. Actually, it cuts around the different reactions of people on the ship, but right before the ship turns, the priest's brother is being very nervous. He's been very nervous. He's worried about what's going to happen and people looking at them and stuff like that. And the brother's like, what? Stop complaining. Everything's all fine. Why don't you ask God why he made you a sheep and why he made me a wolf? Blah blah blah. And he's all very arrogant and he's very punchable. He's a very punchable guy. The pompous brother is. But the second they realize they're turning, because they think they're turning back to go the other way, he becomes scared. He is shitting himself, and he says he can't go back. He can't, and he looks terrified. And it really, it was a really smart thing to do in the first episode, is to present this really kind of almost two-dimensional asshole, and then just completely pull the rug from him, and just sort of have him be vulnerable for a second, just to give us a sense of oh, okay, regardless of if I'm right or wrong about you lying about certain things, you're running from something because you're terrified of going back. That was a really smart little moment from a writing perspective. Likewise, we have, I assumed this was a pair of Japanese characters, because you've got one made up in kind of the geisha looking outfit with the white makeup and the wig and all that, and then maybe her servant by the looks of it. But then later on, so there's the woman who talks to Mara in the dining hall for breakfast, goes to their door and tells them not to speak in front of anyone. And it's okay, so how are you related to these two characters exactly? Why are you in charge of them? I have no idea, but there's a connection here, obviously, that's established. But then what's more interesting is that the one who looks like the servant of the two says to the geisha, and again, I'm just using that word because that's what she looked like when we first saw her, you need to keep practicing your Japanese, clearly indicating that she's not actually Japanese and she is learning Japanese. And they're sort of getting by because most of these people here don't speak Japanese or whatever language her native language is. Obviously it would be another Asian language, you assume, because she does look Asian, but so again, there's this someone's not quite what they say they are. So I'm thinking the priest is maybe not really a priest, and clearly this Japanese woman is not a Japanese woman. So also very interesting, right? So it does a lot of things. There's a lot of little things with these characters in this first episode, just to give you a little taste and be oh, there's something more to them. Then there's a couple, I think it's a French couple, who do not look happy, even though they seemingly just got married. He's staring around earlier on. The wife's trying to be nice. When we see them alone together later, he seems to be having trouble performing in bed and gets really snippy about it. She tries to comfort him, but he blames her and says she could do more, put in more effort. She just lies there like she's, playing dead, I think is the exact lines he used. So he seems pretty unlikable so far. But again, we have a man and woman divide. We have, actually, to sort of break down these characters a little bit, this couple show a man and woman divide, where it seems like this was sort of an arranged marriage that they weren't really doing for love, and that he seemingly feels quite butthurt about this, implying perhaps that her family's the more powerful. So you have a man and woman divide, but you have something maybe where she is at least from the stronger background in terms of class, perhaps. You have the class divide of the apparent geisha and the servant, but then when you see them alone together, it seems like either there is no divide or that possibly the divide's the other way around. At least in the sense that the one who looks like the servant was telling her she has to, keep up appearances, because she's, the geisha is complaining about wearing the makeup and she doesn't want to pretend anymore. And she's like, well, tough, life's not fair, life hurts sometimes, you have to do this. So, it's flipping what the power dynamic we thought was there was. Instead, it's no, she's the one who seems to be in charge of the two, although they both answer to the other woman, the slightly older woman who was barking orders at them. So you've got that, and then the brothers, You've got the pompous ones constantly belittling the priest. He's constantly talking down to him and being in charge. So you've got all these dynamics at play between them, and they all kind of feed into, again, these central themes that, are there in the larger sense of the two, the first class and the lower class and all that stuff. So you've got all this at play, and then Mara herself, of course, this idea that she's doing a job that in this time period is not considered appropriate for a woman. So you got all this at play. And then you've got the big central theme at play, which is exploring the unknown and the mysteries of the deep and the unexplored. And the idea that to this group of people, a woman being a doctor is relatively unexplored, at least where she's from specifically. Obviously, I'm sure it's not the exact same all over the world, and we've got a very, international set of characters, but you've got all these things at play, which I think is really smart. I think for one episode, it sets up a lot of different things and reinforces them. It reinforces all these themes between the different sets of characters who mostly come in pairs, like I said. So the pompous brother of the two brothers, he has an interaction with the brother who came asking for help earlier on. The one who came in asking for help for the pregnant woman. So that was his sister. And he's at the stairs later on, and he can't get out the stairs because the gate's closed. But he sees the pompous brother smoking and asks to join him. And at first it seemed like the pompous brother was going to just kind of like belittle him, but then it turned a little sexual, where he started like touching his face, and I got this sense, it felt like, I'm not sure if we're actually going to go down like a romantic angle here, where the poor guy is going to reciprocate this. He looked quite kind of intimidated by it and pulled away at the time, but that may just because it scares him. Maybe that part of this may be him uncovering that he has these feelings that he's not explored yet because of maybe the time period and so on and so on. But maybe that suggests why these brothers are running. Like, are they brothers, or are they like romantically involved with each other? Or they are brothers, and maybe just this pompous brother is on the run because it was discovered he was gay, and this is not a time period where most places are going to look kindly upon that. So that could be a reason why they were running. Interesting idea. I know. So it's another character connection. It pairs him off with someone else. And then you've got the guy who's dreaming of New York, the one who's shoveling coal down below. And it teases that there's something. It almost feels like it's teasing a supernatural thing because he hears a noise, but then we find out it's just a stowaway. I want to say this guy's name was Eloch or something like that. It was because his name came up. Because I think the stowaway guy, I think he's Jerome. I think that was his name. Apologies if I'm getting these slightly wrong. It's only been one episode, and they've not mentioned their names a lot yet. And the IMDb page that I'm looking at is a little unfinished. Like, a lot of the character names are missing on this, so I am going purely from the episode here. But they kind of befriend a little bit when Jerome like asks for his like leftover bread, and then he eats that, and there's kind of they're not exactly that friendly yet, but it felt like maybe the start of like some trust forming between them, and then maybe these two characters are going to be maybe more morally like on the right as we go through here. I mean, maybe not. Maybe one of them will turn out to be a scumbag and like break our hearts by doing something wrong. But when you have some of the crew of the ship sort of saying, I'm not going to go with the captain because I'm scared, and they don't want, they're quite mean to the poor people. We saw that earlier. And one of them looks especially pissed that a black man is going with the captain. He's like, wait, I outranked this new guy, I should be going with you. And the captain's like, no, you should stay here, and if we don't come back, this is on the lifeboat when they go over to the Prometheus. He looks particularly pissed off, and it's hard not to think there's a tinge of racism here as well, which again is another divide. And we have a ship that's seemingly, well, not all white, because we have the Asian characters, but a lot of white characters. And then I certainly didn't notice any other black characters in the episode, so I think that's something that's going to stick out in particular with this character. So a lot of things set up here with the characters, and I think it does it fairly effortlessly, and it didn't feel overwhelming, because it wasn't exactly doing a bunch of plot with all of them. It was just kind of giving you enough. It was giving. What's smart about it is that all of them, for the most part, subverted what they originally seemed to be by the end of the episode. Not all of them. I would say the married couple are maybe the one that is maybe the only one that didn't quite do that. It did imply that he has a drug problem later on because he's sort of shaking and he's trying to take something and he gets interrupted. But by and large, like, you know, like, okay, the two brothers may not be quite what they seem. There's something on there. If not, like, the greater mystery, it seems like one of them's turning out to be gay. So that's like a new element that's added later on in the episode. Obviously the Japanese pair turn out to maybe not actually be Japanese. There's a lot of like subversions in every single like thread, and that's actually quite smart. It kind of like sets you up in this first episode that, yeah, like, things may not be what they seem, and we're going to be, you know, messing with your expectations as we go forward. Because what's interesting is comparing this to Dark is that Dark was obviously a super complex show once it started like doing different timelines, and we were jumping between young versions and old versions of characters in different time periods, and we had multiple, sometimes we had up to 3 ages for each character we had to remember, and then how they all connected to each other. This, relatively speaking, is actually a lot more straightforward because it isn't that, but there's still a lot of characters at play, and I think this first episode juggles them quite well, and it doesn't surprise me that the creators of Dark were able to do that again. So I'm intrigued. I'm definitely intrigued. No doubt there's some small things that I've not mentioned, and some other stuff that, you know, will be fun to realize as we go forward. But I can't wait to watch the next one. This has been my thoughts on the first episode of 1899. I think it's a really good first episode that sets up the mystery, and obviously just the atmosphere of them searching the empty ship. Obviously it's quite smart that it's the same type of ship, so they get to just reuse a lot of the same sets, but they dress them differently. But it makes sense. It's the same company, you know, they make multiples of the same ship, and they just get a different name. But all of that stuff looked great. It looked very visually cinematic, and it didn't just feel like another run-of-the-mill Netflix show, which a lot of Netflix shows do. So the direction from Baran Odar, who's one of the creators, he directed a lot of Dark episodes as well, is very strong. So yeah, I thoroughly recommend it. If you haven't checked out the first one and you listen to this whole review anyway, I would encourage you to do so. And join me for episode 2 very soon. So, of course, you can support all the content by hitting the super thanks button, or on a more permanent basis, going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keeping all the content coming and making it sustainable. Thank you very much for any and all support, and that includes free support such as liking, subscribing, dinging the bell for notifications, and commenting down below. All these things do help out a lot, and of course sharing around on social media and stuff like that. But that is us, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?